How are you doing today, Cameron?
It's yesterday was good everywhere but Texas in terms of
Yeah, it
election
was
results. So, uh,
big day, big day. We're sitting here with Cameron Rolwitz. Why don't you introduce yourself and what you're running for right now?
my name's Cameron Rolwitz. I am running for Texas State Senate District 11. So that's for the Texas State House or State Congressional branch there. And I guess a little bit of background is I was born in Georgia, but I grew up in Texas, grew up in North Houston area, and then moved down to South Houston after buying a house in April. Um, I went to University of Houston, got my bachelor's in psychology, went to University of Houston Clear Lake and got my master's in psychology. I did research on kind of existential and meaning psychology for my master's. And then I worked full time all throughout college and currently work as kind of like a sysadmin slash data analyst for a company. My wife isn't here. She's out at a job interview, but I have a wife. We've been married for just over 2 years now, and then we have a 10-month-old son who's having a good evening at Grandma and Grandpa's right now. So that's a quick intro of me there.
And you mentioned already at the top, of course, as of this interview, as of us speaking, yesterday was a big wave of elections across the country. The biggest, of course, being Zohran Mamdani, winning the hotly publicized and contested mayoral race for New York. And I'm glad we ended up postponing a couple days so we could talk about this because as a progressive candidate running in, Texas is a much more hostile environment for progressivism than New York. I wanted
Yeah.
to get your first impressions, like watching all of that. You must have been, like everybody else, in a more left-leaning space, just kind of watching with bated breath all of these different elections happen around the country. And I'm kind of wondering, as somebody who is running, what was your thought process there? What was going through your mind watching all this happen?
Yeah, so there's a lot of context um, from a Texas standpoint, right? In terms of like the Texas Democratic Party, even your local, Democratic Party, and kind of the connection with the rest of the U.S. Um, it was bittersweet. We got to see that big blue wave of Virginia taking a supermajority in their house or in their assembly. The clean sweep for the Virginia governor, lieutenant governor, and attorney general's race. Even New Jersey was we found that the Democratic governor outperformed what expectations were going to be, right? And so as a candidate, right, I'm looking to see what was different, what changed, right? What hurt Republican candidates more, what helped Democratic candidates more, what specifically resonated with what was it about Zoran's progressive platform that was able to pull my generation, Gen Z and millennials, who, especially when you dive into my demographic, has historically gone towards Trump and other like alt-right figures in voting, and yet we see that there was a split. They went back to Mondani in some ways, right? And so looking at that and going, that's all well and good. These were, you listen to the CNN panelists and the AP News and all of that going, this is blue states with blue elections. This is what we should expect. Like, there's not anything significant, right? You look at like establishment media and more of the establishment Democrats, the corporate Democrats, downplaying the progressive win, right? And so I'm seeing that even in the state of Texas, right? I have a primary opponent. Um, she is a more moderate establishment Democrat, and I am running on obviously a progressive platform focusing on like affordability, education in Texas, at least specifically energy, right? We don't want 2021 again. And those trying to translate the progressive platform pieces that I liked from like specifically Mamdani's campaign, like free and fair buses or free and fast buses, right? A linchpin of my platform in a Texas context is high speed rail, right? Um, so you're looking at these wins and you're trying to go, okay, what does that make? How does that translate to a Texas? Right. And it's very different, especially in my county, which is Brazoria County, which is the most conservative by votes county in the state of Texas. Um, and I got to see kind of a glimpse in a special election for a state Senate seat in Texas, in Tarrant County. Taylor Remmett is a progressive running for that seat that was vacated when the previous Kelly Hancock was appointed to the comptroller's office. And he is a union president, veteran, active in workers' rights, labor unions, all of those pieces. And he pulled 48% of the vote in a county that went plus 17 for Trump just last year. So they're going to a runoff, but his platform is very similar to mine, right? I didn't even know he was running until after I had announced and was starting to look into other races and had written out my platform and seeing him as a test case of there is a way to resonate progressive ideals, especially with economic populism, like left-wing economic populism, that is resonating with rural Texans in a way that has not worked previously. I'm seeing it, and when I'm going out to these rural areas of it is affordability. They can't afford their groceries. They're seeing all these new developments come in, all of this new big business, and they're excited about it. And then, even though they got that $15 an hour, job at the HEB or whatever that moved in, because that moved in, they're now getting priced out of their own homes in the property taxes because the state of Texas realistically only has two revenue streams, which is property taxes and sales tax. 80% of the property tax revenue is brought in from the average Texan, like their property taxes. Businesses only pay about 20% of that revenue, and that makes up a third of our state budget. So I'm seeing these big wins on the broader stage. I'm seeing Taylor Remmett get literally within 2% of just winning it outright in one of the most conservative counties in Texas. And I'm also running in one of the most conservative counties in Texas. And when I'm out talking to people, they're talking about what's on my platform and it's resonating with people, even people who are, lifelong conservatives. The elderly are much more open to these things. People my age that look like me that are, working out in construction or working out in the oil fields or working for, Dow Jones Chemical out here. I think back to 2016, which was the first election that I was really kind of conscious about. I turned 18 a month after that election. I was not eligible to vote in that election. And I watched a lot of my friends who were Bernie bros watch that primary fall apart. Um, and then they went, well, I just want anti-establishment. Like I just want to disrupt until people start to listen to me. And so they all went to Trump. And I was like, hey, hold on. um, you know, um, because initially they thought, it's a joke, it's funny, right? And I'll admit, I went into those spaces initially because I was like, well, let me see, right? And I was, 17, still trying to navigate all of that. The internet was a very different place back then. I mean, that was when you had like iDubbbz and Filthy Frank at their height. That was peak cringe, like edgelord culture on the internet. And Donald Trump appealed to that at that time, right? Um, and so now they've been throwing this temper tantrum now for 10 years, right? Because Trump came in, didn't actually do anything the first time to help that specific demographic of people, right? Because it didn't serve his interests to actually improve things for young men in the country. You want them to stay mad because then all you have to do is present an option to be mad at, and they will gladly go in that direction, no questions asked. And so as I'm talking to these young men now, I can say, like, is your life materially better than it was 10 years ago? No. And they're honest about that. They're willing to have these conversations now. I've been on camping trips with people who were like, I'm a libertarian, but I voted for Trump on the economy. And I'm like, cool. How's that going for you? And they're like, not great. I'm not happy about it.
Well,
So
and speaking of kind of the economy and, it's interesting that you're framing it in this way of like, okay, how do we take these, what I think a lot of people see as the things that affect big cities, major metropolitan areas? We're talking about these elections in New York and Minneapolis, and then you apply that to Texas. But we've also seen just in the last year a lot of very unique problems being handed, not just to Texas, but other places that would be called flyovers, um, the heartland, the Midwest. And one of the things that I've found particularly galling has been the cutting for funding, government funding of rural hospitals,
Yeah, yeah,
which
yeah,
for I grew up, granted, not nearly, I've been to Texas, not nearly as open and big as Texas, but I grew up with a lot of family on farms out here in rural Washington. Once you get away from Seattle, the other side of the state is mostly Washington, is mostly just farmland all the way over to Idaho. And so
yeah.
I know where how long of a drive it can be, how much the what resources are needed to maintain that kind of thing. And I kind of wanted to ask you about the funding for that, but also what else are you looking at as far as the administration's failings, as far as
Yeah.
not just conservative, but like you were saying, the more median Democrats, the way that they have failed the population and how those things are currently affecting people. What are some of the other things you're looking at? Whether it's, the big beautiful bill or Elon Musk's, I think he has his star base down there
Yeah.
that took over. There was a fascinating, I don't remember what publication it was in, but there was a fascinating, darkly fascinating article that just talked about how he kind of took over this entire small Texas town. And so I'm curious, what are the other things that you're looking at?
Yeah, yeah. So Texas is where I would say if someone like a Greg Abbott or like a Stephen Miller or like a Ron DeSantis, right? That kind of grift area, not Donald Trump, like smart enough to know what they're doing. When you look at Abbott and look at him as a president, right? I look at Abbott's power in Texas and the Texas GOP's power in Texas and the rapid deregulation of everything in Texas as the test bed. We are the test bed for the rest of the country, right? Texas has more, Democrat voters than Republicans. Our gerrymander was already so bad that the 2020 census was like there was already a lawsuit over that map and it just didn't go anywhere. And now there's a new map mid-district, mid cycle that's making it even worse, right? And so you're there's this weird disconnect of rural Texans being so angry at the cities and basically accepting Abbott's direction that it's the cities that are hurting you. They're sucking up all your funds. They're taking everything from you. While he is working directly with the legislature to cut these fundings, pass these constitutional amendments that give the state legislature more power. And we've been dealing with that since Abbott was elected back in 2014, right? So this is over 10 years. We've had almost 12 years of Greg Abbott. And specifically, there's two billionaires in Texas that really influence things because one of the other key things is there are no contribution limits for an individual to state level races in the state of Texas. So Elon Musk could write me a check for $1 million and I can deposit that directly into my campaign account. No questions asked. It's why Greg Abbott has $86 million for his reelection campaign, and he hasn't even started taking donations until recently. Because the other thing you can do in Texas is you can keep those campaign donations in a bank account, and then when you're ready to, run again, you just roll it into the new thing, including House and Senate seats, like federal level seats. So if I get elected, right, and I have, say, $200,000 left over in my campaign account, if I choose to run for, US Congress next time, I have $200,000 essentially of seed money. He has an $86 million head start. And so there's so much money being spent in politics for, Texas GOP, House representatives, state senators writing law. Like we passed 800 bills in the last legislative session, which are only 2 weeks, by the way. Our state legislature meets 2 weeks every year. And we passed 800 bills and got 17 constitutional amendments on the ballot this year.
Well,
They are
and
rapidly deregulating, and it's
which is
causing.
like what the Trump admin always, and especially when you look at, again, Texas, oil rich country, some of the biggest national oil reserves, oil fields are like practically their own national landmark or nationally recognizable in Texas. So
Yep,
like the massive amount of, you saw it in Trump's first term, and it doesn't get very publicized a lot, but the deregulation, particularly for the oil industry, particularly for
yep,
like national forest, national park programs, um, it doesn't surprise me. And Greg Abbott has been a fairly steadfast Trump acolyte. Like he is not one of the conservatives that have really broken in the line with him at
yep.
all.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And so that's where I'm looking at this, watching it happen, growing up, watching going from Bush to Rick Perry, then to now Abbott. It has only gotten worse. And, as a data analyst, I've pulled the numbers and have been reading through them, and I'm like, oh, it has actually only gotten worse. I mean, look at our ratings, right? Education plummeted, everything is plummeting in Texas because you're getting rapid deregulation while also incentivizing massive donation and influence from mega donors in the billionaire class, right? It is the Texas government as it stands right now is already like an oligarchy. That is the end goal, right? This Texas state constitution was already massively decentralized in terms of power, right? We have railroad commissioners, we have land commissioners, we have agriculture commissioners, we have a lieutenant governor, we have a governor, we have there was so much power distributed when it was rewritten after Reconstruction, so that the intent was liberals post Reconstruction could never retake control of the Texas state government and effectively do things. But over the last 30 years, we have watched that power get collated back in the Texas government through all of these constitutional amendments. I have never seen a constitutional amendment in Texas fail. And the reason why they do these constitutional amendments is in our state constitution, if a governing body does not explicitly have that right in the state constitution, then they do not have that right. So each constitutional amendment is the Texan people ceding more of our authority to our state government. Banning capital gains tax, US voter ID. These are already things that are already either law or already like we already don't do. And so that's how the Texas GOP also gives the illusion of getting things done. Look at all these amendments we passed that are doing the things that are all related to the culture war. And then look at the other half of the amendments. They were all banning certain taxes ever being levied. So you're giving people something angry to be about and show up to vote for on the culture war front. And then because they're already there, they're going to vote yes on all these bans on taxes. And so the Texas state government has deregulated so far, has cut off so much of its revenue streams through taxes that I do not see a way for the state government to not go bankrupt soon if it does not change things. It is about to send the economy in a tailspin, right? Because property taxes make up 54% of our budget revenue. Then there's sales tax. If people leave, you immediately cut off the only two sources of revenue that you have. They're leaving because the property taxes are astronomical because you have no other way of collecting revenue from the state to balance that out, right? And then they're not buying anything in Texas, so you don't get the sales tax revenue. What has been disguised as fiscal like conservatism or fiscal responsibility has actually just put us into a tail spiral economically. And if we don't change things or redistribute the tax burden, it's not going to go well.
Going back to Mom Donnie's campaign really quick. One of the
Yeah.
more interesting aspects I've noticed, and we've already kind of touched on the difference between kind of establishment Democrats and more progressive candidates. Um, for much of, and this is, calling back even further, for much of like the Kamala Harris campaign, for example, the topic of trans people, which obviously is something, very important to me, was something that a lot of the establishment just kind of stayed away from, while conservatives continued mounting attack after attack. And in the end, there were all sorts of polls that showed how much that was actually effective in changing the kind of public perception of trans people.
Yeah.
One of the things Mom Donnie did that was so fascinating to me was unwavering support for trans people. He was out here, he was doing podcasts and interviews with trans people, with drag queens, talking about how he's going to help them, how he's not going to abandon trans people at a time when you don't need to do that. Like to be clear, trans people are such a minority and they've been so vilified that a progressive candidate does not need to, I hate to use the term paying lip service, but you really don't. But then you have a state like Texas, which, they made national headlines a little while ago because I don't believe it was passed or was going to actually pass, but there was a kind of publicity stunt type bill that was going to make, gender identity fraud illegal and punishable by jail time. Was one of the representatives put that out there. And then they've done plenty of other things regarding, trans women playing sports and all kinds of that stuff. So in such a heavily conservative area,
Yeah.
in a place that, like you were saying, votes so far for Trump, how, as a progressive, do you kind of walk that tightrope between this thing that people have been told is so important, this thing that the conservative government of the state have hyper focused on, have made this culture war issue,
Yeah.
but that is, by banning healthcare is tangibly hurting people in Texas now. How do you approach that?
Yeah. So I this is something that, Zoran's campaign has definitely been a blueprint for me, right? This also kind of gets into where I'm breaking from the local party. Um, there's many other reasons, and we can get into the backstory of just how bad things are for Democrats in Texas later. But um, I don't. One of the core things of my campaign is being able to hold two things as true at the same time. I can advocate for trans rights while also advocating for you to have a living wage. I don't have to pick. And me advocating for trans rights does not mean that I'm not going to advocate for you any less in having a living wage. And I have found when talking to people, it almost never comes up, really. When I have been out talking to people in rural America, they don't give a shit about trans issues. They really don't. They don't give a shit in a way that they're acting on generally, right? They're more concerned about the affordability. They're more concerned about the fact that they see all this development, but it's actually hurting them. They're seeing their SNAP benefits get cut. They're seeing, I talked to a veteran last week who got a letter from Texas Medicare saying that even though he just had open heart surgery, that his medicine would cost too much for them to cover, and they would be dropping him off of his insurance um, on December 1st. Um, what I have found is rural Americans gravitate to the culture war stuff to yell and scream about because it's the only time they feel heard. So if I show up and talk to them about, hey, your rent's going up, you can't afford your food bill, your property taxes are increasing, you're getting priced out of your own area that you've lived here now for 40, 50 years. They know it's not trans people. They know it's not gay people. They know it's not immigrants, but they don't. And this is obviously a very charitable point of view of this, but from talking to people, they're talking to me more about affordability and survival than they are about culture war stuff. And even on like my social media, you'll have people that will be reposting like Charlie Kirk stuff, libs of TikTok, and they will take time out of their day to go respond to Mays Middleton, who's my current state senator, who's running for AG, who passed like the trans bathroom bill, the Ten Commandments bill. Those were his bills. And they're coming out and saying, I don't care. I can't afford to eat. A long answer to that question, and I'm not sure I answered it fully,
No, no,
but
you
that's
absolutely did. I think there's something, and I want to kind of talk about this when we talk about the difference between more establishment Dems and a more progressive candidate, because I think there's something to be learned about the difference between kind of empty virtue signaling and standing by a principle of a campaign.
yeah,
And I think that is one of the things that the establishment, when you look at Hakeem Jeffries and Schumer and the way they've reacted to Mamdani, it seems like they don't really understand that. That empty posturing is, people are familiar with it. People know what it looks like by now. But I wanted to kind of go back to what you're talking about, where you're talking to veterans or talking to people regardless of their political affiliation, people who might be libertarian, whoever, they voted for Trump out of economic interests or because they feared immigration or whatever. One of the things I've talked about a lot on streams when I've kind of talked about the opportunities that progressives, people broadly leftists, have during Trump's administration, and how a lot of them go kind of unanswered. One of the things, I believe it was Texas that had the disastrous floods this last year that killed several attendants at the
yeah,
the girls' summer camp, which was just, it's horrendous. It's a failing of infrastructure. It's a failing on multiple levels. But then you saw a lot of very smug, for lack of a better term, liberals who would talk about how, okay, well, you voted conservative, you voted for Trump, Texas is this way, you get what you vote for. And to me, that has always seemed like the most, like, just almost depraved way to respond to something, because what you are doing there, not only are you turning your back on like the idea of human suffering, you are dividing along party lines empathy, which I think is a horrendous thing. Not only that, but additionally, you're then, I think, abdicating so much ground for people to say, well, look at the Dems, look at them do this. They don't care about their voters. They don't care about this people. When there are people out there who do care. One of the things I always talk about is like, you need to engage and interact with people who did vote for Trump and are feeling the economic pressures from the tariffs. They are feeling in their wallet where
yeah,
grocery prices are higher. They can't,
yeah.
get a home loan. They can't get a down payment, like all of this other stuff. So when it comes to reaching across the aisle, it seems
Yes,
like
yeah, yeah.
you have a really good grasp on the need for everybody to be educated about these topics, the need for, regardless of how they voted, creating this, to me, that is the idea of an actual big tent movement, is this kind of left-leaning economic populism, talking about here are the things that are affecting you. Here's how we can change them together. And so far, I really appreciate that. And I wanted to ask about, additionally, just kind of springboarding off of that, a lot of people, they've seen Zeron, they've seen people all across America at low levels, high levels of government just kind of say, I'm fed up with this. I'm going to run for something. So I kind of want to ask, what was your journey to becoming a candidate, to wanting to run, um, and how, what brought you to this place in Texas of all places?
After the 2016 midterm, I went to my government teacher. I was a senior in high school at that time. I went to my government teacher, um, and he was probably libertarian. I was libertarian at that point. I was so a little bit more context. I grew up in far right fundamentalist Christianity. Um, that was how I grew up. I left when I turned 18. Um, and that's kind of been kind of my whole guiding journey behind that, right? Like why I did existential and meaning psychology. Like my thesis was on a psychological model of how people deconstruct meaning and purpose in life and rebuild that from the ground up. So I'm using a lot of that in my own campaign, right? Because people are dealing with new stressors that they haven't dealt with before. Before, they were comfortable and maybe just angry about a culture war thing. Now they're uncomfortable and it's a lot harder to ignore. Um, and so you need to give them a direction to go. Essentially, I had decided to run as a write-in candidate for a justice of the peace position just to see what the process was like. That was when I got my first taste of just how stacked against you it is to run in Texas. First of all, you have to do a petition to be a write-in candidate. You can't just be a write-in candidate, and you have to file within the same time period as the major party candidates. So to be a write-in candidate, it's already a whole mess. But again, that was back when I was libertarian at the time. And as I started reading more, I went, started exploring things in college. Uh, I was like, oh, libertarian assumes an equitable system, and we don't have that. So I can't be a libertarian until we make the system more equitable. If that makes a bit more sense of kind of my background and how I'm approaching the campaign. And so that didn't go anywhere. And then in 2020 through 2022, I was active in College Station, which is where A&M is, because that's where I did my freshman year at A&M. And I was a state delegate. I was heavily involved, hadn't decided to run yet. And then in September, Charlie Kirk was assassinated. I was already getting to the point of I was donating, I was voting every time that I could. Like I was short of like going to meetings and doing more things that I didn't have time for as a new father working full time, like all of that. I was getting to the crossroads of I need to make a decision. Like I either need to get more involved and just accept that sacrifice of like I'm going to be tired all the time, or keep doing what I'm doing and maybe increase donations, go to the candidate events, meet them a little bit more, and try and influence that way. So it was the Friday after Charlie Kirk was assassinated, and I was sitting there trying to figure out like, what do I do? Which way do I go? And my wife calls me and she's just in tears. And she's like, they just fucking fired me. And I was like, they what? She's like, yeah, they fired me over my social media posts. Um, my wife had made some posts on her private Instagram account after Charlie Kirk had died, and it was, the posts basically saying like, "This is what got y'all to say something, not the thousands of kids dying in Gaza." Because my wife is a teacher, so she taught refugees and asylum seekers English as part of their requirements going through that process. The company then turned around and fired her for what they claim is spreading hate speech and inciting violence online. And so as I was reading more, like looking together relevant court cases, meeting with lawyers, trying to navigate all of this, I was like, this is the most inhospitable environment. And if the system is built for people like me to be able to navigate it, and I'm barely navigating it, I cannot imagine other people trying to go through this. And that's ridiculous. And so it was a combination of that and that made me decide to run. She got fired on Friday. We went to the James Tallarico rally. That was literally the next day. Um, Talked with him, and then I started showing up at the local Brazoria County Democrat meetings like the next week. And initially, I had said I want to run for Congress. My district. I did not realize it was one of the ones impacted by the gerrymandering. So I am now in a completely different district. So the initial opponent I was looking at is a different opponent. Started exploring things, met with some more people. There was only one other person at the party meetings that was around my age. Everybody else was mid 40s and older. I was talking with the other guy, Konstantinos. I think I mentioned him in an email. He's the congressional candidate for Congressional District 14, which is Randy Weber's district. I had actually approached him to be a campaign manager first. And he was like, "Hey, I'm running in that race." And so that's when I went, okay, what other races are there? I started exploring the local level and peeling back things in Texas a bit more. Like I obviously had taken the Texas government course that's required in college, but that's still, they're talking about Texas government from like the 1870s. Where we're at now is so wildly different from where we were then. In doing all of that, then I was like, okay, the state level is important, right? My Texas State House Representative Cody Vasu um, was the chair of the redistricting committee. I looked into the state Senate race, saw the current representative, saw that he literally only has that seat because the Democratic Party didn't run anybody against him. And now he's running for attorney general. And I looked up everything, filed everything myself, opened the bank account myself. You know, one of my small businesses that I own is a hosting company with that I own and operate with my two like childhood best friends who have been helping me along this campaign. And I filed, got everything ready, and then left to go camping. And on the way home, the PAC finally got back to me and they were like, "Hey, we already picked a candidate from like back in March. So we're not going to support you in this race unless you go to House District 25, which is the state house race. But there was another person who was nominated, so we need you to go talk to them to can either not run or just confirm whether or not they're running." So I'm brand new in politics, still don't really know anybody. I go call this guy. We talk to him. I talked to him for about an hour, lay out my entire campaign plan and strategy. And he says, "Okay, I'll get back to you on Saturday." I text him Sunday morning because I haven't heard from him, and he goes, "Oh, yeah, I decided to run." So the only way I would have been able to change to that race after already filing is if I received money and resources from the local party and the PAC to change the filings, refile everything, switch everything over, all of that stuff. So effectively, myself and every other progressive candidate running in this county has been locked out of support and resources by the local party and the state party.
That is so it is just like the Kafka-esque labyrinthine bureaucracy is so frustrating to hear about because it is like it's like, okay, what if the chances for people to become elected who want to serve, the public trust, what if it was just a more convoluted process every time you like have to talk to a representative on a phone line? Like it is just a constant string of like press this for this, press this for this, go back to this, and then hanging up and you got to start it all over again. Like it's
Yep. Yep.
and I want to talk about really quick because redistricting and gerrymandering has been such a big issue for Texas specifically this year,
Yep.
because Greg Abbott did the
Kicked
whole.
off the whole thing. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And it has been a very transparent attempt to kind of massage, let's say, the numbers for conservative representation. For those who aren't familiar, those outside of Texas, can you give a little bit of insight to what has happened there? And you've already mentioned that the redistricting kind of changed your whole district. Just like what is going on there and how are you approaching that as well as a campaign issue?
Yeah. So the nice thing, at least for my races, the state level races, gerrymandering and the redistricting did not impact those at all. Um, in fact, when they did redraw them, they actually drew a lot of districts down here to be no longer like a 51% majority white. Like my district right now, as of 2020, was 46% white, 38% Hispanic, 13% black, and then I think like 6 or 7% Asian, right? When they redistricted in Texas, the congressional races, right? If you look at the congressional districts that overlap my Senate district that was not impacted, the district that I would represent has 3 different congressmen representing it. How am I supposed to effectively work with Washington? CD18 has not had a representative in 8 months and will now not have a representative until at least next year with the runoffs that are happening. Even electoral districts are being played around with by Greg Abbott because he has the sole authority to call special elections. He waited 8 months to call the CD18 special election. It should have happened in May with the other off cycle elections that we have every year in Texas that are your local races. Even if we got elected, right? Even if we flip the Senate, which we only need 4 seats to do that in Texas, assuming Taylor Remitt wins in the runoff, and assuming that we flip a singular statewide office, right? Maybe it's the governor's office because Greg Abbott is wildly unpopular now, like lower disapproval, almost equal with Trump in his disapproval rating right now, if I remember correctly. Even then, the amount of time it will take to undo the damage, because most of the big damaging things were constitutional amendments. So the problem that you run into is you're not even going to be able to start to do the things that you're promising in your first term. You have to essentially run on, I need you to give me at least 2 terms. And when I get elected, that means the work just started. Like one of the big things that I want to do for education in particular is it is illegal in the state of Texas for teachers to join a union that claims the right to strike or collectively bargains. That is illegal in the state of Texas. It's why our teachers are just getting obliterated by uh, administrations, the state, education department. They just took over. You want to talk about, I want to talk about small government. They just took over Fort Worth ISD. All of those elective school board members are gone. They answer only to the state. And so that's kind of the uphill battle that you're running in is even if I got legislation passed to repeal that law banning teachers from striking, the first thing I have to do is come back to my district or go talk to the Texas American Federation of Teachers and go strike now because I need your political leverage. And that's the kind of campaign I'm trying to run of, yes, I'm running for office, but I'm also educating people along the way of what rights they have and what rights they should execute. And one of the other things is when I tell them like, yeah, you have this right, when they start exercising it in mass, they will find out that they don't really have that right like they're supposed to. And that should galvanize them even further of, oh, I have this right. I'm supposed to have this right. And now it's not really there anymore. That's going to bother me. And especially in Texas, which is supposedly a libertarian playground. My district was Ron Paul's district. And now it went to Trump by like 20 points. What
It
happened?
is it's been fascinating to watch the kind of I'm putting together a video and I mentioned Palantir and the kind of
Hmm.
the new emergent surveillance state where you had when I was growing up, War on Terror, early 2000s, the Patriot Act was a
Yeah.
massive,
Yeah.
massive boondoggle, especially for any libertarian types like Alex Jones. And, all of these people were talking about how it's this massive overreach of power. And now those same people are advocating for
For more.
just a surveillance state. And I want to kind of springboard off of that, talk about tie together that with Greg Abbott and the culture war stuff, and talk about speaking of people thinking they might have rights or being reinformed of that. ICE and the protests around ICE. Greg Abbott has given troops and sent National Guard troops to assist ICE officers, I think in Chicago and
Yeah.
Portland, some of the other big cities.
Yeah.
When
Yeah.
it comes to immigration, obviously Texas has a massive immigrant population being right on the border. And we are constantly hearing about, whether it's from Stephen Miller or Trump or, whatever, about how the border towns are just besieged and overrun with MS-13 gang members and violence in the streets. And is this also kind of like the trans issue for people who are living there? Is this very secondary? Is it more, does it feel more like political theater than a reality people are living in?
Now, yes. Now I would say yes. Before, no, like because we're not a blue state, right? We've been largely, ironically, sheltered by a lot of the National Guard overreach. We're sending our National Guard to Chicago, to Portland, to California. Meanwhile, we have the biggest border, and so you see a lot of Texans that are like, what what are you doing? Like it's getting more evident the political theater because it's getting harder to maintain plausible deniability of why you're doing it, right? If you're saying the borders are besieged, why the hell are you sending the National Guard out to Chicago? Why are you sending them to Portland? Why are they not at Laredo? Why are they not at the border towns? Like if it is this bad, Why are you taking our protective force and putting it as far away from the border as possible that you claim is an issue? It doesn't make sense. And people are starting to go, well, the facade is getting harder to maintain because it's taken on too much too quickly. There has not been enough time to ease people into that, right? The speed and the rate at which the Trump administration is moving in this second term compared to the first term, in my well, I could say this, in my professional opinion, it's too much too quickly. And it's causing too much distress to the average person that they can't ignore it. And then when they start to try and the natural thing that people do when they have these kinds of cognitive or logical errors that they're seeing is they either go to someone they trust to tell them what to think about it. And that does what's called an external justification in psychology. The stress is gone. We're good. I didn't have to change anything. If you don't have a trusted person, like more and more Americans, I believe, I haven't looked at the data to confirm this, but are getting more and more distrustful of establishment news media, you know, corporate media in general, their own representatives. They don't know what's true anymore and who to trust. And so now, in a weird way, they're having to figure it out for themselves for the first time. And that is why you're seeing, to what we were talking about earlier, right? Like on TikTok, you see these like hashtags. I downloaded TikTok for the campaign and I'm upset about it.
It's yeah,
Um,
it's and I don't blame you. I don't blame you.
uh, I never installed it, never had account until like last week.
It's one of
Uh,
those things that like you feel a generational divide, because like you graduate from high school, a decade passes, you're working your way through starting a family and everything, and you're like, oh, I'm still hip. I still listen to, some top 40 music. I like some modern stuff. And then something like that comes along and it's the cementing factor of like, oh no, I'm not a kid anymore. This is beyond me.
I and you would think that I would know, having ran like a YouTube channel for a couple years. Like even with that, I refused to make a TikTok account. I was like, you're either gonna watch my long form videos or you're not. I'm not capitulating to that. Like there's too much context for me to cut it up into a 60-second or 2-minute video. I can't.
Well, and
Um,
it's interesting you bring that up because I think TikTok has had this, and obviously there's been government attempts to regulate it and all just a mess on that end of things. But it's had this fascinating effect along with I think other developing things like AI that I think they have definitely contributed to this idea of like not knowing what's real and what's fake anymore. You have like even just in the last couple of days, I've seen multiple people share AI videos, whether it was from the civilians being killed in Sudan currently, or whether it was something from the most recent election. And it's just like it feels like no matter what side of things you're on, it is a constant facade, whether that is literally things being fabricated and sold to
yeah,
you or
yeah,
the angle like you were mentioning with legacy media. I think there's been this disillusionment, this cognitive dissonance, particularly among like liberals, with how for Trump's first term, it was the whole thing was that journalists were keeping speaking truth to power and they were keeping everything in check. And now I feel like
they're
that
not.
illusion for a lot of people has been dispelled
Yeah,
with and
and
I don't blame people. They got to
no,
keep
yeah,
jobs, but like
and that's what I'm seeing, right? Is the typical trusted sources, our faith in them has been so shaken over the last 10 years that people are now going, okay, well, I'm going to ask my family members and my friends, right? Like my grandmother, for the first time after Charlie Kirk, like she called me and she, Georgia, conservative, moderate, surprisingly, considering, the religion I was raised in, but has been very much like, I don't like Trump, but I'm still voting Republican. Because she grew up in like the McCarthyism, the Red Scare, all of that stuff. And so there are so many, the method in which they have found the core fear of each generation and exploited that. With my grandmother, the Red Scare. With my dad's generation, like Gen X, it was nuclear warfare, right? Like with our generation now, it's AI, mass shootings, not
It's this amalgam of like, nationalism and trying to tie that into economic prosperity.
yeah.
And I think, like you were talking about, a lot of people are realizing that it's such bullshit. And it's hard to blame a lot of people for voting for it
Right.
because of all the myriad problems.
But
But
also
at the
just how
same time,
convincing it is, even if you
yeah.
just dip a toe into it. Like
Hmm.
I, if I had probably my freshman year of college sat and talked to the Turning Point USA people a little bit longer, other than just picking up a sticker that I thought was kind of funny, I probably would have gone right back into the alt-right pipeline I just got out of. And I would have had no idea. Because there's so many different ways to frame right-wing ideology and adjust it and make it to where one of the things that, they Republicans and the alt-right has done so well is turning issues into something that, whether it is actually impacting their life or not, they believe it is. And that makes it personal to that person, right? It's why identity politics have gotten so big lately. And most of Republicans is a broad coalition of single voter or single issue voters, right? But kind of going back to the original point was people are not trusting their media, they're not trusting things online. They're turning it's why, I was watching your video of the No Kings protest of it felt different, right? There is at the very least a seed that has been planted in most people that is to distrust people with money telling you things, which is very different from previous elections, right? And especially one of the other things with my campaign is being very transparent about just how hostile representing your neighbors or attempting to represent your neighbors is, at least in the state of Texas and even, federally, in these campaign laws, these restrictions, right? I have to work full time. I have to stay working. I cannot quit my job because I cannot you see the plausible deniability throughout every single law, right? Of, well, why, if I was running for Congress, can I pay myself a salary up to what a current House of Representatives member makes? I would not have done that. I would have matched my current salary and quit. But that makes sense when you look at it from making it to where the average person can quit their job, can try and represent their community, and doesn't have to be a wealthy business owner to be able to make it through the campaign. It's not true in Texas. If this interview gets posted and someone from my company recognizes me, I could be fired the next day. There are zero protections for me as a candidate in Texas unless I own a business that is successful. And then I don't have to worry about being fired. Let alone the fact that you need 500 signatures to appear on the ballot, but your opponents can challenge every single signature, even though you have to have a notary sign the document proving the authenticity of everything. So even though I only need to get 500 signatures, I actually need to get 1,000 because on average, 20% get rejected. Couple that with the fact that if I did not get enough, I then have to pay for my race level $1,500 to appear on the ballot. For a US rep or Senate level, $3,000 to appear on the ballot. Do you know how much money I am projected to need to raise to win this seat? Not even get through the primary, just win the seat.
Mm-mm.
1.5 million.
Jesus.
For context, the other Senate candidate that just went to a runoff, he raised 120 grand. The two Republicans that were running against him combined brought in over $3 million.
That is it. It it shouldn't be surprising because I looked into a lot of donors and stuff. I went to CPAC last year to kind of cover everything before the election. And so many, whether it was governors, congress people, senators who showed up on stage there, you just look into their donation history, their donation profile, and they get, this many hundreds of millions from this
Yep.
oil company or whatever.
Yep.
And
Yep.
so it shouldn't be surprising but seeing it put in, I think there's an abstraction that a lot of people have from politics where it is held as this separate class, which was never the intention
Never,
of
no.
American government, like representative government in any way. It is not that you are only able to lead or to govern if you make X amount of money, if you own X amount of car dealerships, you know? And it's kind of why I think it's so funny when people, will talk about Mamdani being socialist or having socialist policies and how that's disqualifying somehow versus,
The crazy thing
somebody.
is he doesn't. 20 years ago,
No.
he would be center left. That's how far we have moved. That moderate now is actually, middle right, and progressive is center left of, pre 9/11.
Mhm.
That's how far we have shifted. And it's insane.
Well, and I wanted to maybe the last thing we'll talk about to go back to, you were talking about your wife had been fired over some Charlie Kirk posts. One of the things that has accompanied, and it's partially been through memes, you saw it a lot with like the dark Brandon memes and stuff, but is this trend of dark woke, this
Mm,
this idea of pushing back, because we've seen now just this kind of callous, wanton cruelty from talking heads in right-wing spaces. There was one post recently, um, where people were freaking out about Jay Jones, who, had some spicy leaked text
yeah,
messages
yeah,
winning. And we're talking about, the likening that to the group chat from the Young Republicans, which are not
very different things.
analogous. Yeah, very different things. One of them had many more people who were actually like, it's a very different thing. Um, but I find it interesting that it has been for so long, the Democrat and Progressive Party line has been they go low, we go high. And there has been this kind of ignorance of that from any conservatism where and I think Trump really cemented that in a big way of bringing this political mudslinging back into in vogue in a way that it hasn't been since like what,
Yeah,
late 1800s, early 1900s. um
yeah,
and I kind of wanted to get your read on, with Jay Jones winning his race, very likely it's been reported. Um, and you mentioned iDubbbz and Filthy Frank earlier, kind of seeing where the internet and how the culture has moved through these progressive spaces back to this point where people aren't willing to be nice, but are still advocating for progressive causes, still advocating for, Gaza, Palestine, trans
yeah,
people, Black Lives
yeah,
Matter, that kind of thing.
yeah.
So what is your kind of read on that and just the era of respectability politics we're in?
Yeah, I think Mamdani modeled it really well, right? Where he didn't go low per se, right? Like when you look at the mayoral debates where he just calls out a fact. There's a difference between a low blow that is not based in anything but like an ad hominem attack versus bringing up a relevant fact that is demonstrating the character of somebody else, right? I look at it as more of Como threw a punch and Mamdani hit him back with the open-handed slap. Like, I'm gonna hit you back, but I'm still gonna pull the punch to maintain dignity in a way, right? Of, okay, you fired the shot. I have a way to, respond to that, but I don't need to sensationalize it, right? Zoran didn't harp on that. He brought it up a couple times and moved on, right? There's a difference between, I think, like what I think people are looking for in kind of the dark woke ideal is don't just take the punch and then talk about something completely different. You can take the punch, acknowledge that that was insane, and fire back quickly, and then talk about what you want to talk about. They want to see you have a spine to defend your principle that you stand on, call out the problematic behavior when you see it, and then move on. And that's what, to me, going high means. It doesn't mean ignoring the accountability of the statement or something crazy that they said, right? Just because it was a low blow doesn't mean that the high road means ignoring that low blow even happened. And I think that's what a lot of people are frustrated with establishment Democrats with of why aren't you at least calling it out? Like, say something. The bare minimum is at least acknowledging that that's not an okay thing to say. So we're not in an age of like respectability politics. We're in an age of who's going to take the punch and then just say thank you, basically, and move on, versus who's going to take the punch, go, that was uncalled for. This is unnecessary. This is not what we're about. But, there's the beam in your eye for the speck you tried to pull out of mine. Like, and we're going to move on to a different topic now. Like, rebut, rebuke, move on. That's it.
Well,
That's
and
all you
I
got to
I
do.
think we've seen a lot of that. Like I remember the State of the Union address at the beginning of the year was like a particularly egregious example of that kind of thing where you had people wearing like pink shirts and holding signs, and Trump was meanwhile just on stage like basically using them for target like a shot put,
Right, right.
just like crowd working them, and they just did nothing. And
They did nothing. Yeah.
I think it's this thing that a lot of people are mad about. Like, how many times have people heard that, what Trump is doing is unprecedented? It's shifting norms. This isn't how we do things. How much hand wringing has there been from Chuck Schumer or, Senate Dem leadership versus what they've actually like done about it. And I think
Right.
so many people, people are talking so often about people need primary Schumer and Jeffries and like all of these other people. And I think it's also I think it's a reaction to that. Like
Yeah.
the
And
average wine mom is pissed off and will tell you.
yeah, and that's the thing, right? Kind of alluding to what you were talking about with like the trans issues previously of the virtue signaling, right? It's perceived as I said my thing, I can move on and never talk about it again, right? Versus Zoran, for example, right? Supported trans issues and then went to gay bars, went to trans events. He put his money where his mouth was. There's sending people are tired of the strongly worded letters, right? Like I just watched the Texas House of Democrats write a big letter to Greg Abbott saying, "Hey, use the $28 billion we have in our rainy day fund to fund SNAP." What the hell is that going to do? He's going to probably not even read it. So what is the next step, right? And I think the voter knows what the next step is. You go to the food bank, you start finding the churches that are distributing. It's what we're doing out here in Alvin. The only reason Alvin, Texas exists right now is the local churches propping it up through sheer spite. They are donating food. 20 out of 25 kids in Alvin ISD went home with food. That's how bad the food is out here. That the kids every day in school are bringing home food to their parents. They're they're paying. There is a local hotel that 90% of its occupancy is homeless people that the church scraped enough money together to be able to put them in a warm bed that night. When we talk about like rural hospitals being shut down and people being abandoned, that's what people are seeing. That's their lived experience of where are you? You haven't held a town hall in my district since 2019. How do you know what's affecting me and what's going on in my life if you're not out here even asking the question? And so when you're seeing Zoran say, I support trans rights, and then go to Pride and then go to these events, and not in a way that's gratuitous, right? Not in a way of I'm showing up to give my 5-minute speech at the beginning and then I'm running to the next event. Now, he is doing that within reason. Obviously, he's not staying the entire day or for, 4 or 5 hours unless it's like, a specific event that he had planned for. But he's giving it more than the bare minimum of I showed up, I checked the box, I can go leave now. And that's what voters want. That's what they want. It's the fact that I'm having a town hall this Friday night at the Alvin Public Library, and I expect it to be standing room only. I'm then moving the next one for December to the Angleton Public Library. I'm moving my town halls around the district, but focusing in the rural areas because Democrats abandoned them first, and then Republicans started killing them for money, effectively, right? The first thing that I have to do to connect with these people is admit that Democrats abandoned them first, and then talk through how what they want to see and what they're looking for, right? There's so much social shifting and dynamics at work, and it's very difficult to navigate, but people just want to see a politician that stands on their principles, is open to changing them based on feedback from their constituents only, and shows up. That's it. That's all people want. And they're not getting that from a Chuck Schumer, from a Hakeem Jeffries. They are getting it from a Zoran, from the Abigail Spanbergers, from Jay Morris in Savannah, from Taylor Remmitt in Tarrant County. These smaller races, they're getting it, but they're not being publicized, right? Like you were the first person to respond back to me. And I got the email like I think you responded almost immediately and I just wanted to send back that gif of Plankton going, "I don't know. I didn't think I'd get this far." Because when you're running an authentic campaign, you effectively get shut out of the establishment roots. But that's all that's ever been mapped out. So Zoran gave us a brand new map of how to run outside of the establishment and make your dollars go further than their millions. And it's working, it's resonating. And that's what people want. And I think if the Democratic Party shifts to address that, gives young candidates a chance. That was the other thing was young people turned out to vote again. And we hadn't seen that since 2020. You give our generation people that at least are within 10 years plus or minus, they're going to be more inclined to go vote for them. And yet, when I show up, when other people like me show up, we get actively pushed out of the existing infrastructure and systems to elect people in Texas, at least.
Well, I think that about does it for all my questions. Do you want to talk any more about your platform, your plans for the future? I know you just mentioned that you have a town hall coming up, and kind of do you want to talk about your plan for those real quick?
Yeah, so this next town hall, it is going to be live streamed for those with disabilities or immunocompromised who can't come out to at least be able to ask questions and watch the town hall. But basically, I'm going to do a long explanation of the constitutional amendments, what passing them means, why the language is confusing intentionally on the bills, essentially just educate people on how they just voted to screw themselves without realizing it. And then I have every other progressive candidate will also be there. So the county judge that's running, the congressional candidate, local justice of the peace. We're all basically building our own infrastructure right now. The biggest thing that we're running into is fundraising, which is so frustrating in the current economic landscape that we're in, right? Of I pulled the campaign finance reports of my Republican opponent. He's already raised like 60 grand. I have not broken 2,000, which is okay, right? Like I'm already working to figure out a lot of what I'm doing doesn't cost money. It doesn't cost me to rent the conference room at the public library. It doesn't cost me to use my own equipment to live stream these things. The cost comes into the systems, right? For me to use Mobilize, which is the big event thing that like No Kings went through and everything like that, which is like the gold standard, it's like $400 a month. For me to get access to what's called VAN in Texas, which is essentially a history of what elections someone voted in, and then a prediction matrix based on their demographics of, where they lean politically, right? So that I can pull up a neighborhood, see that it's, 90% Democrat. I'm going to go there to get my signatures because it's more efficient. I know I'm going to get the signatures versus going to a conservative neighborhood and not getting signatures. um, that will probably cost me several $1,000s. So there's these campaign essential things now that are even getting locked behind paywalls. Um, and so we're in this weird position of we need money to pay for these things to mount an effective campaign against establishment Democrats and Republicans. But I also know that people are struggling. And, my wife losing her job, I'm on hardship for the mortgage. Like we can't afford the mortgage. You know, we're figuring it out. I get it. It's hard, and finding a job right now is even more difficult. But um, since I'm not taking any money from like corporate PACs or special interest groups, all I have is individual donations, and even like $5 goes enough way. But it's this catch 22 of you need money to get more awareness to then reach people who have money that they can spare. It, the more you peel back campaigns in the US, the worse it gets. um, but that's kind of the biggest thing that we need to be successful down here is we just need money. And the beautiful thing is for all of our races, we can take contributions from outside Texas. It doesn't have to be just Texas only, which is, I think, a misconception that people have of, well, I can only donate if you're in my state. Not true. That's how you have billionaires making super PACs in these states and getting the state legislature fully Republican through those kinds of things. Um, and then the other thing is just awareness, just talking about us on social media. I mean, there's five of us progressive candidates running in the most conservative by vote county in Texas, and nobody knows we exist. Just if you can't donate, reposting, spreading, talking to people that you know of, and just getting that message out there of this is not just a campaign. We're also trying to connect it with social movements. Like we're doing the food drives, we're doing the healthcare drives, we're doing the things to build up a community so that if elected and I need, you know, pressure from the local populace, like my example of teachers striking, if I want to pass education reform, I want teachers to already be trained on how to strike and how to collectively bargain before election day. So that if I come into office and I'm trying to pass something like that, I don't have to spend a month or two training people how to exercise their rights. I can come back, hold a town hall, and go strike, strike now. Here's the resources for food, cover your rent, bills, all of those things while you strike. And I will get this bill passed with that political and social leverage that you're affording me now, which is so much more than if I presented it as most establishment Democrats do of if we just win this election, we can save democracy. And then you never hear from them again after the election. You don't hear about anything they've done that was a win. You don't hear about anything they've done that's been difficult to parse or pass. You don't even get calls for insight on legislation. And that's what I'm trying to prevent is getting elected, not really being able to do anything because I don't have the social support behind me, and then not getting elected again because I couldn't do anything. And it's this cyclical symbiotic relationship between campaign and community. And if you can't have one without the other, you need to have both to have a healthy, functioning democracy and a healthy representative that is actually representing your interests. If y'all are involved with me and my work, I can be involved with y'all in those communities, bring money to fund projects. You can tell me what bills you want to see. That's what you're supposed to do as a representative. And we have not had that in Texas for decades. But
Really quick, where can people find that live stream of your town hall? And then where will people be able to go to look at your campaign more and support you?
yeah, so the website that we have right now is cannonfortexassenate.com. I have a Threads. I have a Twitter, which is also Cameron for Texas Senate. I have Facebook. The campaign website's going to have the most up to date information, like the upcoming events, the link to the live stream, um, donation links, all of that stuff there. And I'm still building it out. I want the platform to change and adjust as I talk to more people in the district. So there'll be things that are getting added, expanded upon. It's a living document on the website. So check and see how it changes over the coming months based on how I talk to people. But the campaign website is probably the best method to find everything because it has everything running through it centrally. Um, and that'll have the link to live stream, everything like that. So every event that I do, I will try and live stream it. If I can, if there's no internet access or whatever, I don't have power or whatever, I will let people know ahead of time. And then probably just post a video of it afterwards, just in case. So,
Well,
yeah.
thank you so much, Cameron, for sitting down with us today. And yeah, I
Yeah,
wish you
thanks for
all the
having me.
best. Of
Yeah.
course. Hello, everybody, and thank you for watching this latest interview. As you might know if you watch the channel regularly, I don't usually do interviews, but when Cameron came to me and I checked out his platform, I was persuaded, as I've also been wanting to do more interviews lately, so I think this will become something of a regular thing, not just with political candidates, but other people like artists, musicians, other content creators. So, if you enjoyed this, please check out the links down below to see how you can support the channel. At the Ko-Fi links down below if you want to give donations directly to me, or you can join all the cool people scrolling across your screen right now at the Patreon and get access to fun little door prizes like Discord access. With that out of the way, I hope you enjoyed this interview, and if you're living down in Texas, please go support Cameron, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.